It stands on the horizon like a postcard, a perfect, snow-capped peak that watches over the landscape of northern Oregon, so beautiful and so familiar that the millions of people who see it every day have long since stopped thinking of it as anything but scenery. Mount Hood is the postcard mountain, the beloved symbol of its region, a place of recreation and beauty and pride. But Mount Hood is not just a beautiful mountain. It is a volcano, an active one, a peak with a history of eruptions and the potential for more, and beneath its serene, glacier-clad surface, forces are at work that could one day threaten the people who live in its shadow. And now, that mountain has stirred, showing signs of the activity that reminds everyone that the peak on the horizon is very much alive. Mount Hood has stirred, and the sobering reality is that 2 million Oregonians live downstream, in the region that the mountain's hazards could reach. In this video, we are going to explore what this stirring means, and why Mount Hood, for all its beauty, is a volcano that demands respect. We are going to understand what the mountain actually is, an active stratovolcano, cloaked in snow and ice, standing near a major population center. We are going to explain the lahar, the volcanic mudflow that is the mountain's most far-reaching hazard, and how the river valleys connect the distant peak to the populated lowlands where millions live. We are going to look carefully and honestly at what the stirring does and does not signify, resisting both false alarm and complacency. We are going to trace how a lahar behaves, why it can strike with limited warning and even without an eruption, and why the narrow margin of time makes monitoring and warning so vital. We are going to consider the 2 million people who live downstream, the geologic record that proves the danger is real, and what preparedness truly means. And we are going to reflect on the strange and beautiful duality of a mountain that is both a beloved symbol and a living volcano. Stay with us, because this is a story about one of the most beautiful and most quietly dangerous mountains in America, and about the moment it reminded everyone that it is still alive. To understand why this matters, you first have to understand what Mount Hood is, and why it is considered a dangerous volcano despite its peaceful appearance. It is a stratovolcano, a tall, steep-sided volcano of the kind that can produce powerful eruptions, and it is one of the most prominent peaks in its region. An icon of the Oregon landscape, visible from great distances, including from the major population center that lies not far away. Mount Hood is an active volcano, one that has erupted in the geologically recent past, and that will at some point in the future become active again. Its beauty and its familiarity can obscure the reality that it is a living volcano, capable of eruption and of the hazards that come with it, and its proximity to a large population makes those hazards a matter of serious concern. The most significant hazard that Mount Hood poses to the populated areas is not necessarily the eruption itself, but the lahar, the volcanic mudflow that can travel far down the river valleys from the mountain. A lahar is a fast-moving torrent of mud, rock, water, and debris that surges down the slopes and valleys of a volcano, and it is one of the deadliest of volcanic hazards, capable of traveling great distances and burying everything in its path. Mount Hood, like other volcanoes of its kind, is capable of producing lahars, and because it is covered in snow and ice. An eruption or a collapse could rapidly mobilize that frozen water, combining it with rock and debris to form a lahar that would race down the mountain's flanks and into the river valleys below. The lahars from Mount Hood can travel down these valleys, following the rivers that flow from the mountain toward the lowlands, reaching areas far from the peak itself. This is why the 2 million Oregonians who live downstream are significant, because the river valleys that lead from Mount Hood flow toward and through the region where a large population lives, so that the lahars from the mountain could travel down toward the populated areas. The rivers that originate on the mountain flow down into the lowlands, toward the major population center and the communities of the region, and these river valleys are the pathways that lahars would follow. The people living in these valleys and the lowlands they lead to are, in a sense, downstream of the mountain and the potential path of the hazards that flow from it. This is the crux of the danger. The way that the hazards of the mountain are connected to the populated areas by the river valleys, so that an event on the distant peak could send its effects down into the region where millions live. Now, Into this situation comes the news that Mount Hood has stirred, showing signs of the activity that draws attention to its status as an active volcano. When a volcano stirs, it may show various signs, including earthquakes beneath the mountain, changes in the gases it emits, or other indications of the movement of material beneath the surface. Mount Hood experiences earthquakes and other activity as part of its normal behavior as an active volcano, and periods of heightened activity occur from time to time. Reflecting the ongoing processes beneath the peak, the stirring of the mountain is a reminder that it is alive, that the forces beneath it are active, and that the potential for future eruption, while not necessarily imminent, is real and ever-present. It is exactly the kind of event that draws attention to the hazard and prompts a renewed awareness of the danger the mountain poses. It is important to be clear and measured about what the stirring of the mountain means, because it is easy to leap to alarming conclusions, and the reality is more nuanced. The signs of activity at a volcano, including earthquakes and other indications, do not necessarily mean that an eruption is imminent or even likely in the near future. Volcanoes show signs of activity for various reasons, and most periods of heightened activity are not followed by eruptions. The movement of fluids and gases beneath the mountain, the settling of its structure, and various other processes can produce the signs of stirring without any eruption resulting. So the stirring of Mount Hood is not, by itself, a sign that the volcano is about to erupt. And it is important not to overstate the immediate danger or to spread unwarranted alarm. The scientists who monitor the mountain watch these signs carefully, but the stirring alone is not a prediction of catastrophe. At the same time, it would be a mistake to dismiss the stirring as meaningless, because it is exactly the kind of event that warrants attention. A reminder that Mount Hood is an active volcano, with the potential for future activity and the hazards that come with it. A period of heightened activity is a notable event, and while it does not predict an eruption, it does underscore that the volcano is alive, that forces are at work beneath it, and that the danger it poses is real. The stirring is a wake-up call of sorts, a moment that draws attention to a hazard that is easy to forget, a reminder that the beautiful mountain on the horizon is an active volcano that could someday threaten the region. And it is a prompt to consider, once again, the sobering reality of the 2 million people who live downstream in the region that the mountain's hazards could reach. To fully appreciate the danger, it helps to understand how a lahar behaves and why it is so deadly, because the nature of the threat is what makes the situation at Mount Hood so serious. A lahar is not like a slow, gentle flood that rises gradually and gives people time to escape. It is a fast-moving surge, a torrent of mud and rock and debris that races down the valleys at high speed. And it can arrive with little warning, sweeping away everything in its path. A large lahar has the power to destroy buildings, to bury communities, to reshape the landscape, moving with such force that little in its path can withstand it. The mud and rock can be many feet deep, and the speed of the flow means that once a lahar is on its way, the time to escape may be short. This combination of speed, power, and destructive capacity makes the lahar one of the most terrifying of natural hazards, and it is exactly this hazard that threatens the valleys and the lowlands below Mount Hood. One of the most alarming aspects of the lahar threat is that a lahar could potentially occur with limited warning, and not necessarily as the result of a major eruption. While an eruption could certainly trigger a lahar by rapidly melting the mountain's snow and ice, lahars can also be generated by other means, including the collapse of a portion of the mountain weakened over time by the heat and chemical processes associated with the volcano. This means that the danger to the valleys below is not entirely dependent on the mountain, showing clear signs of an impending eruption. A lahar could, in principle, begin with limited warning, which is one of the most concerning aspects of the hazard, because it means that the communities downstream must be prepared for the possibility of a fast-moving flow arriving without the extended warning that a building eruption might provide. This is why the monitoring of the mountain and the systems designed to detect hazards and warn the population are so important. Because a lahar can move fast and arrive with limited warning, the ability to detect it as it begins and to alert the people in its path can be crucial to saving lives. Monitoring systems watch the mountain for the signs of activity and of lahars, and the goal is to provide warning to the communities below, giving people time to move to higher ground and out of the path of the flow. In an event where every minute counts, and where the lahar may take some time to travel down the valleys to the more distant communities, an effective warning system can save lives by giving people the time they need to reach safety. The importance of this monitoring and warning, and of the preparedness of the communities in the hazard zones, is a central part of managing the risk that Mount Hood poses. The preparedness of the communities in the path is a crucial factor in how a lahar event would unfold, and it is an area of ongoing importance. The people who live in the areas that could be affected need to understand the danger, to know the warning signs, to know the evacuation routes, and to be ready to act quickly if a warning is issued. Preparedness includes planning evacuation routes, educating residents about the hazard, and ensuring that the systems are in place to warn the population and guide them to safety. This preparedness is essential because in a lahar event, there may be little time, and a population that knows what to do and acts without hesitation stands a far better chance of surviving than one caught unaware. The stirring of the mountain serves as a reminder of the importance of this preparedness, a prompt to renew the awareness and the readiness of the communities in the potential path of the hazards. It is worth reflecting on the strange situation of a large population living, largely without daily concern, in a region that the hazards of a volcano could reach, because it says something about the human relationship with risk. The valleys and the lowlands below Mount Hood are desirable places to live, and over the years, a large population has grown up there. In the region watched over by the Great Mountain, the danger, though real, is also relatively rare in human terms, the significant volcanic events occurring at long intervals, so that generations can pass without an event, and the memory of the danger fades. People build their homes, raise their families, and live their lives in the region, the mountain of benign and beautiful presence. The threat and abstraction that seems unlikely to materialize in any given lifetime. This is the nature of living with a rare but potentially catastrophic hazard, the way that the low frequency of the events allows people to discount the danger, even as the potential consequences remain significant. It is worth understanding the role that the mountain's snow and ice play in the hazard, because this frozen water is central to the danger of the lahars. Mount Hood, like other high peaks of its region, carries a substantial cover of snow and ice on its upper slopes, glaciers and snowfields accumulated on the cold, high mountain. In its normal state, this ice is part of the mountain's beauty, feeding the streams and rivers that flow from the peak. But it is also a reservoir of the water that could turn a volcanic event into a catastrophic mudflow, because if the ice were rapidly melted by volcanic heat or mobilized by a collapse, it would provide the water needed to transform the loose rock and debris of the mountain into a fast-moving lahar. The presence of this ice, poised on the slopes above the river valleys that lead down to the populated areas, is a key part of what makes the lahar hazard at Mount Hood so serious, because the raw material for a mudflow is present on the mountain, waiting for the trigger that would set it loose. Consider what the path of a lahar would look like as it descended from the mountain, because this reveals how the hazard reaches toward the populated lowlands. A lahar generated high on Mount Hood would pour into the river valleys that radiate from the peak, funneled by the terrain into these natural channels, and it would race downstream, following the rivers as they descend from the mountain toward the lowlands. As it traveled, it would move through areas increasingly far from the peak, toward the region where a large population lives, and the communities built along these river valleys, drawn by the rivers and the fertile valley floors, would be in the path of the flow. The rivers that carry the beauty and the water of the mountain down toward the region are the same rivers that would carry the lahars, so that the very valleys that connect the mountain to the populated areas are the pathways of the danger. This is the geography of the hazard, the way the river valleys link the icy peak to the lowlands where millions live, turning an event on the distant mountain into a threat to the communities downstream. There is a crucial element of timing in all of this that shapes the possibility of survival, because a lahar, for all its speed, takes time to travel down the long valleys to the more distant communities. For areas close to the mountain, a lahar might arrive very quickly, leaving little time to react. But for the communities farther down the valleys, toward the populated lowlands, there could be a window, a span of time between the generation of a lahar high on the mountain and its arrival in the more distant areas. This window is precious, And it is the reason that monitoring and warning systems can make such a difference, because if a lahar can be detected as it begins, and the warning transmitted quickly to the communities in its path, the people there may have time to move to higher ground before the flow arrives. The whole strategy of surviving a lahar rests on this margin of time, on detecting the flow early and warning the population fast enough to allow escape. It is a race against the mud, and the systems designed to give people a head start are, quite literally, life-saving. The geologic history of Mount Hood makes clear that the hazards are not merely hypothetical, because the mountain has been active in the geologically recent past, producing eruptions and the associated hazards, and the evidence of this activity is written in the landscape around it. The mountain has had periods of eruptive activity, and the deposits and the features left by past events testify to what the volcano is capable of. This history demonstrates that the hazards, including the lahars, are a real feature of the mountain's behavior, not a mere theoretical possibility, and it shows the potential for future activity. The geologic record is a sobering reminder of the power of the volcano and the reality of the danger it poses, a warning from the past about what could happen again, and a reason to take the hazards seriously despite the mountain's long periods of quiet. Understanding the scale of the potential impact helps convey the gravity of the situation, because a significant volcanic event at Mount Hood, particularly one that generated a large lahar reaching the populated areas, could affect a great many people and cause enormous damage. With a large population living in the region that the hazards could reach, a major event could threaten many lives and destroy homes, infrastructure, and communities. This is the scale of what is potentially at stake. The reason that the hazards at Mount Hood are taken seriously by the scientists and officials responsible for monitoring the mountain and protecting the public. It is not a minor or a localized threat, but a hazard capable of affecting a large and populous region, and this is why the stirring of the mountain draws such attention. Given all of this, the stirring of Mount Hood, while not a prediction of imminent catastrophe, is a valuable and important event because it focuses attention on a hazard that is easy to overlook and reminds everyone of the reality of the danger. The signs of activity are a signal that the mountain is alive and that the processes beneath it continue. And they prompt the scientists to watch closely and the communities to renew their preparedness. In this sense, the stirring is a kind of gift, a warning that comes without the catastrophe, an opportunity to remember the danger and to prepare for it before a real event arrives. The worst outcome would be for the danger to be forgotten, for the preparedness to lapse, for the population to become complacent, and the stirring helps to guard against this by bringing the hazard back into focus and reminding everyone of what is at stake. The situation at Mount Hood is also part of a broader picture of volcanic hazards across the region, because Mount Hood is not the only active volcano in the Pacific Northwest, nor the only one with populated areas in the potential path of its hazards. The region is home to a chain of volcanoes, part of a larger belt of volcanic activity, and several of them pose hazards to the surrounding populations. Together, they represent a significant volcanic hazard for the region, one that requires ongoing monitoring and preparedness. Mount Hood is one part of this larger picture, a dangerous volcano near a large population, and its stirring is a reminder of the broader reality of the volcanic dangers across the Pacific Northwest, dangers easy to forget during the long quiet periods, but that are real and demand respect. What should the people in the region do with this information? And how should the rest of us understand the situation? The most important response is not panic, but preparedness, an informed awareness of the danger combined with the readiness to act if the need arises. For the people living in the areas that could be affected, this means understanding the danger, knowing the evacuation routes and the warning systems, and being ready to respond if a warning is issued. It means taking the hazard seriously without living in constant fear and paying attention to the guidance of the authorities. For everyone else, it means understanding that the danger is real, that the monitoring and the preparedness are important, and that the resources devoted to watching the mountain and protecting the population are well spent. The stirring is a moment to reflect on these things, to renew the commitment to preparedness, and to appreciate the importance of the systems that stand ready to provide warning if the mountain should ever threaten the region. In the end, the story of Mount Hood's stirring is a story about a beautiful and beloved mountain that is also an active volcano, a peak with the potential to threaten the large population that lives in the region below it. The stirring is not a prediction of disaster, and it is important not to overstate the immediate danger, but it is a powerful reminder of the reality of the hazard, a signal that the mountain is alive and that the threat it poses is real and ever-present. The 2 million Oregonians who live downstream in the region that the mountain's hazards could reach are living with a rare but potentially catastrophic danger, one that is easy to forget during the long quiet periods, but that could someday materialize with devastating force. The stirring brings that danger back into focus, and in doing so, it serves a valuable purpose, reminding everyone of what is at stake and prompting the vigilance and the preparedness that are the best defense against the day when the postcard mountain finally stirs in earnest. The beauty of Mount Hood and the danger it poses are, in a sense, two faces of the same mountain. The same volcanic processes that built the magnificent peak also creating the potential for the hazards that threaten the region. This duality is at the heart of the human relationship with the volcano, the way that a mountain can be loved and enjoyed even as it holds within it the potential for catastrophe. The people of the region live with both the beauty and the danger, enjoying the peak while, ideally, remaining aware of the hazard it represents and prepared for the possibility of a significant event. The stirring of the mountain is a moment when the danger, usually hidden behind the beauty, comes briefly to the fore, reminding everyone that the postcard peak is a living volcano. And so Mount Hood has spoken, in the language of the signs it shows. And what it is saying is that it is still alive, still active, still capable, and still a danger to be respected. The 2 million people who live downstream in the shadow and the potential path of the great mountain would do well to heed that reminder, to renew their awareness of the hazard and their readiness to respond. Not with fear, but with the sensible preparedness that living near an active volcano warrants. The mountain has stirred, the danger has been brought into focus, and the time to be prepared is always now, before the mountain wakes in earnest, so that if the day ever comes when the postcard peak unleashes its power, the people of the region will be as ready as they can be to meet it and to survive it. Mount Hood watches over Oregon, beautiful and beloved, but it is a volcano, and its stirring is a reminder that the beauty and the danger are forever intertwined, and that respect and preparedness